Our guest today is Greg Lewis, Vice President of Duda Farms, one of the largest row crop producers in Ventura County, if not within California. He's joining us today to share his perspective and his knowledge about the history of Ventura County agriculture and a little bit about the challenges and opportunities that agriculture faces both today and in the future. Have a listen. Well, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to come speak today. We are so excited to have you. I just wanted to have a chance to sit down and talk to you. For me, this has been a long time coming. You know, I know we've seen each other at meetings and different events and stuff and shared a few words here and there, but the chance to actually sit down and talk to you is something that I've been really looking forward to. So,
well, I appreciate it. Yeah, we've been a collab supporter for quite some time.
And that is much appreciated as well. So, so you're a Ventura native, right? Or Ventura County native?
Ventura County native in terms of my profession for the past 25 years, but born and raised about 20 miles south of here, so very close.
Okay, so close. So you're an import like me, but for a longer period of time.
I was born and raised pretty much right on the border of the Los Angeles and Ventura County line.
Okay.
And my family would come up on a regular basis. We'd drive the coast weekly and go to a little restaurant called Sal's in Oxnard. Family were simple people. And when we would drive up the coast, one of my very, very first memories, and this is a true story, is I'd be looking out the window of Dad's Suburban, and it'd be PCH in Las Posas, PCH in Wood, PCH in Hueneme, and I'd look out at the fields and look down the rows of the celery, the strawberries, and the lettuces, and I was so impressed with how perfectly straight the rows were. It was mesmerizing because you're driving by at 60 miles an hour. And back then, I don't think the tractor drivers had GPS. I think all the beds were listed by hand and by touch and by feel. But little did I know, 40 years later, I would be in those fields and overseeing the production in those fields. Back then at 5 years old, obviously, I had no idea it was going to be in agriculture. But that's really how far back Ventura County ag is rooted within me, because I've been seeing it since a child.
So, and one of your first jobs, I've heard, was running an organics facility in the Oxnard Plain. So how did that happen?
I graduated UCSB in the summer of 2000. My best friend and I moved to Idaho to be ski bums for a year. And the trip was cut short, one, because my parents, I think, were smart enough to realize that they wanted me to get out of a ski vacation town sooner than later, because I think it can set the hook in you pretty fast. I had an opportunity to come back to Southern California and operate a green waste recycling and composting facility at the end of Hueneme Road and Arnold Road, close to the base, right by the duck clubs. And the facility sprouted up as a result of AB 939, which was an assembly bill that was passed in 1995 that mandated every county in the state of California had to divert 50% of all of its waste from the landfills by the year 2000. And one of the first things to be diverted was green waste. Green waste being when a waste hauler comes to your home and picks up the bin that has all of your landscape materials, or if a tree trimmer goes to a shopping center and trims the trees, puts them in a recycling bin, that used to all go to the landfill. Instead, we had contracts with the municipalities and the local vendors and the Navy base to take in all that green waste, transform it into mulch in composts, and then sell it to all the agricultural operators. And that's how I got to know really the agricultural community, because we were selling them dark, rich, nutrient, organic matter to add to the fields and to increase the health of the soils.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So then somewhere along the line, you got your law degree, I heard.
I did.
And But now, and for the last several years, you're the vice president in charge of all of Duda's operations in the area. So how did that happen?
So I get that question all the time. How do you go from being in agriculture to law school and then a farmer? Yeah, not a very conventional way of pursuing a career. I get it. And landing in the compost facility was something I didn't plan on either, because I was an English major in college, so I can read and write. Learning how to manipulate the biological decomposition of organic matter happened on site, and we made a lot of mistakes.
On-the-job training.
Yeah. Had an opportunity to buy that company in 2004. Didn't go well. And so my best friend and I, who operated the facility, decided to go to law school, went to law school, and in 2007, we both worked for his family's law firm. And then a couple years later, I actually was at a barbecue and ran into a gentleman who worked for Duda that we were selling compost to many years earlier. He asked me what I was doing and told him what I was doing, asked me if I liked it, and I said, well, depends what day of the week you ask me on. He said, would you like to get back into agriculture? And I said, possibly. We romanced each other for 6 months, and now, almost 15 years later, I've been back in agriculture. And I work for Duda Farms Fresh Foods. I'm the vice president of the Western Farming Operations. We farm about 50,000 acres across several states. I oversee the Yuma operation, Oxnard, Ventura County, Lompoc, Santa Maria, and Salinas. It's about 15,000 acres of celery, iceberg, romaine, broccoli, and cauliflower.
Some of the most highly regulated crops, right? Leafy greens, etc.
Yes, we certainly endure our fair share of regulation from a federal, state, and local level.
Yeah. So somewhere along the way, starting with your fascination with agriculture as a child, driving up the coast, your work in the organics facility, probably even, while you were working as an attorney, and then now in your current role. Your love of Ventura County agriculture has led you to, I think, maybe an understanding of the history of Ventura County agriculture. I heard you talk in a meeting that we were at, and very passionately explain, why is agriculture even here in the first place? You spend 5 minutes on social media digging around, and you will find comments from people talking about how, we don't have enough water, so why are we farming here? This is not the right climate. This is not the right area. Farming and urban infrastructure are not compatible, etc. But you have a very different thought on that. And could you tell us about that?
Sure, that's a lot to unpack because I think you could dedicate a podcast session to each one of those subjects, whether it was being urban farmers, the local politics, or the availability of the resource of water. Going back to why is farming here, we can start there and then certainly transition into any other subject you'd like. When you look at the history of Ventura County dating back, a couple hundred years, you have a handful of families who identified the very favorable climate here in Ventura County. We can farm 365 days a year. Christmas Day and 4th of July can be the same temperature. They both can be 80 degrees. They both can be 65 degrees. Either way, that Mediterranean arid climate is very conducive for, I think, every crop. If you look at the various cropping patterns here, from citrus to avocados to lettuces to berries to Brussels sprouts to cabbage to artichokes to celery, everything grows here. We as grower, packer, shippers don't necessarily farm everything here because there is a certain amount of rent we have to justify. But that weather is our crop insurance. It is so favorable to farm here for the weather and for the soil fertility that if you look at the nation's largest berry and vegetable shippers, I don't have the data in front of me, but I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that the nation's largest, by volume and by dollars, berry and vegetable shippers have an operation here. And if that's the case, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to conclude that at any given time of the year, between 50 and 70% of our nation's fruits and vegetables, are sourced from this region. Because during the winter months, Halloween to Easter, if you will, if you look at the other productive agricultural regions in our country, they've got snow, wind, sub-freezing temperatures, and a lot of rain, elements that aren't conducive to farming. Hence why Ventura County is such a home to these larger operations. But it's becoming more and more difficult. Each year, hundreds of acres give way to development. That's not a bad thing. We have to embrace change and population growth. Let's just choose to be a part of it, not choose to, maybe necessarily be an obstructionist to it, but let's be a part of it and have a say in how it goes down, if you will. But we are urban farmers. When I go to our operations in Yuma, in Santa Maria and Salinas, and certainly Florida, you can't see a building for as far as the eye can see. There are some places here in Ventura County where we have fields that are surrounded by a shopping mall, a school, and a new apartment building. And we've got this small patch right in the center of it. So we have to adapt and adapt to be good neighbors while being good stewards of the land and allowing the land to produce for us.
So the fact that we can grow here year-round, means clearly being able to have multiple harvests, right, or multiple rotations. Where else does that happen? Is that clearly that's unusual, but where else does that happen in the United States?
That's a really good question, and I do have the fortune of being able to travel the country to our other farming operations, and the short answer is not many. The short answer to your question of where does that crop rotation and intensity happen on a similar basis that it happens here, it doesn't. And it's because of what we spoke of earlier, the weather simply doesn't permit that to happen. You look at our farming operation in Michigan, and our harvest window is a several month window between almost, end of May, beginning of June through September. And then beginning of October, you can start to get your first snow. You look at our operations in Florida, and it's the exact opposite. We harvest from beginning of December through now, because as soon as you go through May all the way through October, it's very hot and humid, to put it plainly. And the same goes for Yuma and the desert regions. We farm vegetables quite intensely, starting in September through really the end of March, and then the fields stay fallow all of the summer because you have triple-digit heats, July, August, and September. Some growers will put some alfalfa out there, but the availability of water is changing that environment as we speak. And then move to Salinas, the other major agricultural hub of our country. And Salinas wintertime production is inconsistent because of its harsher winter than here? So the short answer is there aren't other regions that can produce the high quality at the high volumes that we can here in Ventura County, and that's because of the favorable weather that we have. We are farming and harvesting intensely year-round.
Year-round.
And with our land base here, we structure it so that we can put a summer berry crop in the ground in July, be done in December, put celery in February, be done in June, either go with the same strawberry to celery rotation or incorporate bell peppers and some Brussels sprouts. But we're very fortunate that a lot of these different varieties of crops are here because that's ultimately what is sustainable. You can't just monocrop. If you continue to crop the same crop on the same acre, you are breeding a population of microbiology that only feed on that particular crop, and you ultimately will reduce the health of that soil. My opinion.
Well, and that actually makes good, microbiology sense. Having, experience now as the nation and the world, the pandemic, and seeing the supply chain issues that occurred with that, have you experienced any heightened awareness to the need to preserve agriculture in areas like this where it can be so intensely done and not be subject to import-export, supply chain, etc.?
No doubt. And our customers have communicated that to us. And for clarity, a customer is different from a consumer. The customer is the retail store where we all go shopping. Ralph's, Kroger, Albertsons, Safeway, Costco, Walmart. That's our customer. The consumer is you and I, who go and purchase from that big box store, that retailer. So our customers, the stores, have been reaching out to us, not just during COVID, but even pre-COVID, when we had disease issues. We had a big celery juice campaign in 2019 when some celebrities drank celery juice and then no one had celery for 6 months. Our customers came to us and just said, what do we need to do to make sure we have our supply? COVID exacerbated that because the stores don't want to be without their staple products. And so what we've had to do is we've had to learn how to partner with our customer and that store to develop that surety of supply. And Ventura County is a place that is logically appropriate for that because of the things we just mentioned. Unfortunately, we can't produce celery here year-round by law, not by climate or environment. It's actually a moratorium. And so we do have to go elsewhere for celery for a few months out of the year. But the other crops that we spoke about before don't have to comply with that moratorium.
Well, tell me about that moratorium.
From midnight on July 14th until midnight on August 4th, there can legally be no celery in the ground or in the greenhouse here in Ventura County. There is a virus, the Western Celery Mosaic virus, that was causing serious impacts to the crop. So I imagine back in the 40s and 50s, the local operators, pest control advisors, and ag commissioner representatives got together and determined that the best way to rid the county of the disease was to not have the host celery in the ground. And the disease was vectored by the thrip, an insect. If you remove its food source during the warmer time of the year when insects like you and I are the most active, you've disrupted the adult reproductive life cycle of that particular organism. So remove its food source, it's not reproducing. If it's not reproducing, it's not vectoring the disease. If it's not vectoring the disease isn't in Ventura County anymore. and we were successful.
Wow. Wow.
Now, with today's crop protection materials, we could probably combat the disease, but it's forced the operators to go to other locations to source celery for several months out of the year.
And probably helps with that rotational crop thought process.
The diversity,
Yeah.
no doubt, absolutely. I think it's been good for the county, for the ranches, and for the viability of agriculture here to have to move celery out of the county for those several months. Because you've got over 11,000 acres of 30,000 irrigated acres with celery already. It's almost a third. You know, and if we didn't have that moratorium, it would probably be more, which could be problematic for long-term health of Ventura County ag.
I want to go back a little bit to that whole idea of the difference between the customer and the consumer. And, you know, the customer being aware or having a growing awareness, it sounds like, of the importance of keeping agriculture going in a place like Ventura County. But the consumer is a whole other level. And I don't want to speak clearly for every person out there, but the consumer goes into the big box store, like you were saying, right? They grab a bag of celery. Are they aware of where it comes from? Are they aware, you know, that of the importance of growing regions like this? And if they're not, how do we make them?
Well, you're hitting on a subject that I think is the greatest opportunity we as agricultural operators have, and that is bridging the gap between what people think they know about where their produce comes from and where it really comes from. So the short answer is, you know, while I can't speak for every consumer who goes to the supermarket shelf, I would guess that most do not have a full, comprehensive understanding of where the food comes from and what it takes for it to get to that shelf in that condition that it's in today. I would say that's the case. And I think if you were to poll consumers, they would probably acknowledge that. The latter part of your question, I think, is where we have the heavy lifting to be done. And I hope you can answer the question, is how do we do that? I'm a farmer. I am not technologically savvy. I'm sure you could say I'm challenged. I have a flip phone if I could, but in today's day and age, the rate at which our customers and consumers and business associates want accurate and streamlined data, you just can't have a flip phone anymore. So you have to be able to do one of these. And even our customers, the Walmarts, the Krogers, the Ralphs, the Costcos of the world, OTIF, on time in full. They want it. They just want to see that your orders are there on time in full at the volume and quality that you've promised them. But back to your question. How do we educate the public on the origin of their produce, the healthy fruits and vegetables, and how it got there? I've thought about that long and hard. It's things like this. It's podcasts, it's social media. Is it putting screens at the supermarket level so that when you and I go to shop and we grab that banana, that apple, that bag of grapes, that bag of celery, that tray of strawberries, there's a small segment being shown for the public to see what we're doing in the field? Is it a multi-part documentary on television? I don't know. Is it a reality TV show? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Farming isn't as sexy as some of these reality TV shows out there. And so I don't think we have enough drama going on to gain any sort of traction. Well, we could create drama. We could talk about water, but
Exactly.
but Luis, I don't know the answer, but I think as an industry, regardless of where you sit on the water issues, the labor issues, I think as an industry, there's a tremendous opportunity there for us as grower, packer, shippers to re-educate the customer and then to educate the consumer on what it takes to get those healthy fruits and vegetables to the supermarket shelf. Because I do know one unfortunate reality is when agriculture makes news, it's usually not a favorable thing. You see a forklift operator picking up a cow on a pallet that's deceased from mad cow disease, and that dairy farmer is instantly frowned upon.
And sorry to interrupt, but not just that dairy farmer, all dairy farmers.
Yeah, there you go, all dairy farmers, of which there are many here. Mm-hmm. You watch a video of a strawberry spray tractor spraying through the field, could be spraying an organically approved material, but the appearance of it just looks bad. You see a standpipe on a vegetable field that's emitting water back onto the ground that perches back into the aquifer, and it makes the cover of the newspaper, and we are being labeled as water wasters. But there's a story behind all of those, and we aren't telling ours well enough. So I applaud you and CoLab's efforts for commencing this, but you are hinging on something that I think all members of Ventura County Ag would benefit from, and that is telling the story, because there are deep, well-rooted stories to tell. I come from a family, I work for a family. I mean, I come from a family as well, but today I work for a sixth-generation farming family, and there are many of those here in Ventura County. Maybe not sixth, but well into the fourth. And we need that platform. And I don't know what that looks like. I'm happy to meet with, a group of citrus, avocado, cattlemen, berry operators, vegetable operators, and come together in a room and figure out a way to get that message out.
Well, like you said, that's one, we're trying to make a small little effort here to try to help get some of the stories out and offer a platform for people to learn more about agriculture. But at the end of the day, the consumer is also the voter, right? And has the ability to support agriculture staying here through supporting regulations, policies, and elected officials, etc., that try to work with agriculture so that it's economically sustainable into the future, or make things more difficult. And to that end, I've done a lot of reading, I've done a lot of research, I've tried to talk to everybody who will listen to who will actually speak to me, and I found some reports and some letters going back to a agricultural issues summit or workshop that was held by Congresswoman Julia Brownley back in 2012, 2013. And at that workshop or summit, they identified several issues, and they include water, labor, local regulatory policy, the cost of land, as all being critical issues that needed to be addressed for agriculture to continue here in Ventura County. Well, that was 2013. You and I are sitting here in April 2024, and if I asked you for the list, I would dare to say that you would give me an identical list. Is that true?
Yes, there's no doubt. At the federal level, we have an H-2A program, which is labor. At the state level, we're dealing with minimum wage and overtime, AB 1036, 1066. And then at the local level, you've got water, and you've got local ag commissioner regulations trying to regulate the activities we can have on farm in close proximity to these sensitive areas. So you're not wrong. It's water, labor, cost of goods sold are hot button issues. And in all defense, those really are the material aspects to an agricultural operation, is the availability of water, the cultivability, if that's a word, of land, and then the availability of labor. You take any one of those three out of the equation, and unless you're fully automated, it's really difficult to have a viable ag operation. But that's an interesting point you bring up, because AB 1066 sought to improve our workers' quality of life, if you will. And just recently, studies have shown how AB 1066, which curtailed the amount of hours worked before overtime began to accrue, used to be 60, and then it was 55, 50, 45, and today it's 40. So today, an agricultural worker who works more than 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week begins to accrue overtime just like any office worker. And the reason why agriculture had a different, pattern of compensation, if you will, was because the hours that are required to work in the field when you're confronted with sometimes pretty adverse and hostile environmental conditions, flooding, Santa Ana winds, these require us to be in the field much more than 8 hours a day to ensure the quality of the crop, sometimes 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning if our fields are flooded. And so if we were actually accruing overtime for any one of those hours worked before, the price of food would have skyrocketed. I mean, Americans eat the highest quality food at relatively cheap prices because of practices that were in place for decades. That's changed now. The studies recently show that AB 1066, which allowed overtime to accrue sooner and after an 8-hour day, have actually caused harm to our workers' quality of life. Greg, what do you mean by that? They're working less hours. How can it be harmed? Well, because the data show $10 to $15 million less in wages have been paid annually since the implementation of AB 1066, because we simply can't afford to pay that much overtime and sell food at the same price. It just doesn't work. I mean, we have to stay in business. We have to make a little bit of money. That's the way it works. And so what we as an industry are curious to know is, did those who authored this bill ever interview workers to understand from those who will ultimately be affected if this is something that they would have wanted? Because believe me, when we ask our workers throughout the state, it's not. And because it's forced the larger operators to either seek second shifts in the same day to avoid overtime, or even more, I guess, detrimental and impactful to a worker's life is automate and ultimately change the nature of your operation. And we've tried to really, really ensure the quality of life and consistency of our workers so that they're not impacted. But you can only do that so much. You have to remain a viable business. And so I think there are some organizations out there looking to amend AB 1066 to reach a compromise to ensure really the health and longevity of our workers here in Ventura County and in the state of California. Water, certainly another hot button issue. I think local agencies have been a little bit behind the eight ball in responding to hydrological cycles, wet patterns and dry patterns. I think storage is something that we missed the boat on. We, not the agricultural industry, but the municipalities building the infrastructure to store in times like this. For example, you go to the west side of Ventura County, which is really Victoria Avenue, and go west. You've got several thousands of acres of crops out there. But because of the subsurface topography, when United Water Conservation District recharges the spreading grounds and holding ponds out in Saticoy, the west side of the Oxnard Plains and Forebay really recharge first. It might be more porous in that area. Again, I'm not a science guy. But we have what's called artesianing water conditions right now. The water is coming to the surface on its own. Wow. On its own. Our wells have not operated for weeks because of the abundance of moisture in the field. Water is coming to the surface on its own, and it is flowing unabated through ditches to the ocean. And why don't we have the infrastructure in place to capture that for when drier conditions present themselves really in just a few months? Irrigate with the water we've stored through June, July, and August, and not run our wells and utilize groundwater.
Is it just infrastructure that's preventing being able to store that water? Or are there regulations that would stop you from being able to do that?
Yeah, you can't have the infrastructure without getting past the regulatory environment. And so the answer is yes. You can't build those facilities without going through that political and bureaucratic environment.
And I certainly am not aware of any efforts, either locally or at the state level, to streamline that either. So
I'm not even sure that there's any efforts, state, local, or federally, and that's why United Water Conservation District plays such a big part in Ventura County agriculture. They do an incredible job augmenting the supply here for the municipalities, the businesses, and certainly the agricultural sector. And they will continue to play a big part for as long as Ventura County continues to grow at the rate that it is. United is certainly an integral part in the sustainability of Ventura County, not just agriculture, period.
Absolutely.
I mean, that really, if you look at the data, that's something that's very difficult to argue with, if you could even argue against it. I've even thought about, on land that we own, of repurposing it from greenhouse nursery operations to settling ponds, because we have 2 wells on Victoria that have been artesianing for a couple months. I can't even begin to fathom the millions of gallons of water that are flowing unarrested to the ocean. That is probably the biggest sin. If you want to talk about water, that is probably a subject on water that we would all agree with. The supply side. Augment the supply side. You augment the supply side, the demand side becomes a much less contentious conversation. And that's where United comes in. And so I think wherever you sit on the water issue, let's back United, let them do what they do best, which is divert water, which is by Article 21 water, which is develop projects. They've got the science, they've got the technical people, the PhDs, the engineers, and then they've got the project manager. They have everything you need. And so I think between the agricultural community as a whole, we all support United in its efforts.
And that really is the crux of their mission as well, too, right? And I 100% agree. We may be on different sides fighting over how big the slice of the pie is, but I think we can all agree that we need to make the pie bigger in overall.
No doubt.
So.
The bigger the pie becomes, there's much less of an argument as to who gets what, because the larger the pie becomes, there is enough to go around for everybody to continue to operate their businesses and their municipalities. And at the end of the day, that's just what everybody wants to do, is make sure that there's enough to operate their business reasonably and make sure that the residents of each of the cities have enough to reasonably live.
And I think too that it also supports the goal of those who are fighting on the side of water for the environment as well, right? If there is a bigger pie, there's more for everyone and all interests. And it makes living in concert together much easier.
And I think that is a crucial point that we all need to keep sight of, is that the agricultural community is going to be here for decades and decades to come. The cities aren't going anywhere. And the environmentalists, the native species, plant species, and fish aren't going anywhere either. And so with water, it's developing a physical solution that is fair and equitable to all of those interests, and that nobody feels as though that they came away with a big victory to the detriment of others. My opinion only, those type of resolutions are short-lived. It's something to where each one of those stakeholders that you just mentioned, the ag, the municipalities, and the environmentalists, all feel as though they felt the pinch, didn't necessarily get everything they wanted, but got enough to where they're satisfied that their interests, or if they're speaking on behalf of nature, if you will, are covered and are positioned to still thrive.
And that kind of, in my mind, goes back to the importance of educating the consumer about why Ventura County agriculture is so critical on a national level, on a global level. The intensity of food production here can't be denied, and the fact that it can't happen other places also can't be denied. So we need to be working together to find this win-win solution.
Understood. And it's not going to happen on a TED Talk, because no. I saw a TED Talk several months ago with an individual from an Ivy League school who purported to know what's happening in Ventura County agriculture. And it made my blood boil because...
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. I haven't seen it.
Well, the individual couldn't have been more incorrect about what's happening in Ventura County agriculture, as far as how much the grower, packer, shippers are making, about how organic operators are really fooling the consumers and that they're really making so much more than they claim. And it's, I mean, I think I earned a lot more gray that night than I had in the months previous. And before Sigma, I didn't even have any gray. I was full brown-haired guy, pre-2015, and so lots changed. Farming's, it's a lot different. There is a lot more scrutiny with what we are doing in the field than there ever has been before. And this isn't the regulated complaining against the regulator. because we don't have our heads buried in the sand. There needs to be a certain level of regulation to our industry. We are growing food that's going to be consumed by the public. And so there needs to be food safety. There needs to be restriction on materials. But these need to happen within reason, and they need to be done with significant stakeholder input, not done in a vacuum, and certainly not with policy driven by folks who don't have a full comprehensive understanding of how it works. Because that's ultimately what I think leads to lawsuits, is when you have unilateral decision makers cram policy down an operator's throat and that operator is caught off guard. That doesn't work.
It's the at times unintended consequences, I think, of you pass a policy and we would like to think that, the leadership, the folks who support the policy or the regulation have the best of intentions. But if stakeholders weren't engaged, if people who have a true understanding of what implementing that policy looks like on the ground aren't asked to contribute, there are always unintended consequences.
And I think AB 1066, as it relates to labor in California, and the amount of comprehensive groundwater basin adjudications that have been filed post-Sigma are evidence of exactly what you're saying. You've got policymakers who have implemented labor laws and water laws without significant input from those who are going to be impacted by the actions, and now look what happens.
And that kind of is something that has always kind of played around in the back of my mind, right? Here in Ventura, we have SOAR. We have a public that at least vocally supports farmers. And we have a board of supervisors who asserts, that they support agriculture and the like. But our farmers continue to deal with so many challenges and so many of the same challenges. What do you think is going on? Where have we fallen short?
It's a really good question. And I think it goes back to an education and then re-education of the public. For example, when a lot of my friends and family leave Ventura County to drive to LAX because they're getting on a flight, they take the 101 to the 405 and they get to LAX. Okay, makes sense. But I would challenge you, next time your friends and family go to LAX, take Las Posas, take Rice, and take the coastal route. Leave yourself an extra half hour, because traffic's terrible. But I promise you, that individual will come back and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there was that much agriculture between the 101 freeway and Pacific Coast Highway. People use the 101 corridor as a thoroughfare to get from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles and have no idea what is in between. And what is in between is everything we've just spoken about. But I think it is also sometimes lost on our Board of Supervisors, because how do you promote agriculture and SOAR at the same time? And then allow for moratoriums to be passed on limiting the amount of wells that can be drilled to support agriculture. these things are all in conflict with each other. Does SOAR really support agriculture? Or does SOAR really support open space? And I don't know, and I hope I'm not getting too controversial, because I'm really just coming from the heart, is if you have a government that truly does support agriculture, but then in the same breath tries to severely curtail the amount of water that you can apply to that land, then you don't have agriculture. And if there is data to show that the amount of water that's being applied by the agricultural community is unreasonable, then hey, let's hold ourselves accountable. However, that's not the case. And that's not the case because the agricultural operators, we pay for the water. We pay United Water Conservation District, we pay Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, so we pay extraction fees. So we are monetarily incentivized to efficiently utilize the resource. Additionally, we're good stewards of the land. By nature, farmers are good stewards of the land, because we know if we don't take care of that land isn't going to take care of us. And who is us? It's not our business. It is the nation that is consuming the fruits and vegetables produced here in Ventura County. So I think the short answer to your question is, are we in a little bit of an identity crisis? That if we have a board that says we support agriculture, define that. What does that mean to you? Because how can you support agriculture and then put such severe restrictions on our ability to adequately farm? We can't develop our land. We're in SOAR, okay? That's passed until 2054, whatever it is, on a city level and on a county level. If you're within CURB, the city-urban restriction boundary, you're not developing. So we have agriculture. Well, if you continue to deprive us of a material resource we need to produce the high volumes that our country requires from Ventura County, explain to me how that is the preservation of agriculture. So defining that, I think, is one way to get closer on answering your question.
And you kind of are pulling it back to what you were saying about the three legs, right? The three essentials that make agriculture: land, water, and labor.
Right.
And what are we doing to support all three?
And SOAR does have a provision, because I spoke with Lynn Jensen about it at length, bless her. SOAR does have a provision that allows for farm worker housing on land, but it's not that simple.
No.
You still have to go through the entire process of developing your land for housing. And the unfortunate or fortunate reality, depending on which day of the week you ask me, is a lot of our land is very close to the coast. And so enter in a whole nother layer of permits and applications. Some people call it bureaucracy, that you have to endure to get that development, through. And so there have been entities that have been successful in removing their agricultural land from SOAR and annexing it into the local municipality and developing it. That's not lost on me, but it took over a decade.
I think the one that pops to mind with me, I think, was 17 or 18 years.
Is that a citrus operator in Santa Paula?
Yes.
17 or 18 years.
Yes.
That's not insignificant.
Right.
But that doesn't sustain agriculture. The goal isn't for all of us agricultural operators out there. There's 100,000 acres of agricultural land, más o menos, in Ventura County, 30,000 on the Oxnard, Pleasant Valley basins, Oxnard Plains, and then certainly through the Santa Paula, Fillmore, Piru corridor. The goal shouldn't be and is not to take each one of those acres and turn it into a, Orange County McMansion. Agriculture will be here for as long as we want it to be here, okay? But the defining ourself part needs to happen. Otherwise, I think we are lost in our own translations of SOAR and of agriculture, really. I mean, let's define it. Let's get a group of us, city councilmen, women, board of supervisors, men and women, agricultural operators, the permanent crops, the veg crops, the sod operators, and the municipalities. And those principles of those operations should really be vocal in front of the county board of supervisors. That's how you bridge the gap. Sorry for a long-winded answer. I hope I answered your question.
I love it. And you mentioned at the beginning that, potentially reality TV show. Now that could be some good reality TV. Getting that group together, right?
You know what? There are a lot of vibrant personalities in the room, a lot of folks who are very smart, a lot of folks who have a lot of history here, and then a lot of companies who maybe don't have their history here, but have been here for 40, 50 years. And so you need to bring all of those perspectives around the table, I think, to achieve sustainability and resolution. You cherry pick any one of those segments, and it's difficult to, I think, achieve harmony for all of those different facets of the folks who utilize the natural resources, the land, the water, and the labor.
And I think we can probably both think of many examples through the years where only parts of the group got together or individuals got together and it didn't solve what we needed it to solve. So we need to try something different, and maybe that different is, let's just get everybody together.
Yeah, and we're trying to do, we actually not trying, we are doing it right now with water only, not SOAR, not labor. Don't forget, we all still have businesses to run and we have to work. We can't, not many of us can set the time aside to dedicate ourselves to the land, water, and labor issues. Maybe they're called lobbyists, maybe they can, but not you and I, certainly not a lot of the folks that we do business with here in Ventura County. But you're right, I mean, I think there should be a select group of agricultural operators, municipal folks, folks in the government, environmental folks, to discuss what's happening in their industries. That will inform policymaking at the GMA level, the city council level, and ultimately the board of supervisor level. My opinion.
And even possibly influence up to the state level.
We
can hope.
Yeah, that's what you'd like to see. You'd like to see that as opposed to staffs making recommendations to boards and boards acting on staff's recommendation without staff having gone out and solicited the very thing that we're talking about.
Right.
If you look at groundwater sustainability agencies in other parts of the state, they are truly represented by the stakeholders, and the general managers and executive officers of these agencies are meeting with the ratepayers, the constituents, and the stakeholders on a very, very frequent basis. If you don't have the general managers and the EOs of these administrative agencies interacting and interfacing with the folks who are making the community thrive as it is, how are they developing policy? I don't know the answer to that question. It's a rhetorical question, but something I think we can improve upon.
And maybe that's why we have an identity crisis, right?
I hope I'm not blasted in front of the news in the newspaper with is Ventura County in an identity crisis? I mean, just let's make sure we
Right.
add the context to it. I mean, but I think it's something that we can build upon.
Great. Well, so I had preparing for today and our conversation, I actually got to see, watch a few interviews that you had done earlier, a few years ago, one with, I believe it was Western Growers. And in that video, which was fantastic, by the way, you said that your job satisfaction on a 1 to 10 scale was a 12. And that's rare, right? So is it still a 12? And why? What do you absolutely love? What gets you up in the morning?
I get to work outside, I get to breathe fresh air, and I get to grow healthy crops that the world needs. Our population is the highest it's ever been in Ventura County, in the United States, in the world. And the population is eating healthier than it ever has. And so the demand for what we do continues to increase. Don't get me wrong, we can overproduce and we can kill a market. Like, I mean, that's what a lot of agricultural operators do best. But the demand for what we do continues to rise. And what we do is not easy, especially in Ventura County, okay? So one, it's the fact that I get to work outside. I actually get to touch and feel something that we've done. We take a seed that we've produced in our seed mill. We have a lot of proprietary varieties. So we grow our own seed, we take it to a mill, we mill it, deliver it to our nursery greenhouse, we propagate young transplants, we take those transplants to the field, we transplant them for the next 90 to 140 days, depending on the crop and when you planted it. We nourish this plant. We give life to this plant. 50,000 of them an acre, okay? And so we, for the next 3 to 5 months, care for this crop. And so we take it very personal. We aren't manufacturing red high-top tennis shoes in a factory where the rain, wind, heat, and hail don't impact us. We operate in that environment every day. So when we get flooded conditions, Santa Ana conditions, we are caring for crops outside who don't go home when the office closes. The office doesn't open at 8 and close at 5 for our fields. I don't care what you're growing. That's the same for anyone who's growing outside. So if you don't have passion for that, you're not going to succeed. You have to. And we take it very personally. That's why I think my job satisfaction is so high, is that we get to constantly see the fruits of our labor. You've taken a crop to its fruition, it's harvested. And when I go to the store and I watch someone pull produce that I've grown off the shelf into their grocery cart, that feels really good.
I bet it does.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Whether they eat it all or they throw half of it away, I don't know. But I watch them take it off the shelf. They genuinely are buying something that we created. And it's hard to describe that. I hope I did some kind of justice to it, but that's the passion for it.
Well, I can definitely feel your passion. That's amazing. That's amazing.
And it's growing, not my passion. Maybe that's growing too. But I've got a young kid, so it's hard to keep the passion with as much fire in the field because my kid's 3 and I love him to death. But because the amount of arable land is shrinking as population grows, we are going to be required to continue what we do. If not, there's going to be more demand to produce on the ground we're producing on today. So innovation is going to require us to do more with less. Hopefully not less water, okay? Because United's going to make more water, all right?
Exactly. That pie's going to get bigger.
But less with the probably availability of labor, less land, and then less resources available to us. People call them insecticides, pesticides, herbicides. We call them crop protection materials. And we would be foolish to think that we are going to be able to farm in 5-10 years from now the way we're farming today. Just not going to happen.
So, but on a positive note, and to wrap up our conversation, what's the best thing you've heard about agriculture this week?
The best?
Or the best good news you've heard about agriculture this week?
The best good news that I've heard about agriculture this week? Oh, that's easy. It's going to rain tomorrow. It is. Like literally going to rain.
Yep.
So that's just more water to increase the size of the pie temporarily, hopefully more permanently. And that alleviates a lot of stress on our basin. It doesn't matter what crop you're growing. Rain is the tide that raises all boats. Gosh, that pun was not intended either.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and finally have the conversation that I've been wanting to have with you.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your efforts and CoLab's efforts, because I know I've only been able to scratch the surface on the story to tell of agriculture, either from a Duda perspective or a vegetable perspective. There's so much more, and so perhaps this can be an interactive thing with other CoLab members, other stakeholders, or members of the public.
Well, we are certainly committed to continuing this conversation, trying to look at the story of agriculture from multiple facets, and I think that even coming back and revisiting, what kind of feedback, what kind of questions do our viewers, have after listening to you, and maybe bringing you back and getting a chance to actually address some of those questions.
Happy to participate.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, our listener, for joining us today for our first episode of Agriculture on the Edge. We're going to be producing a series of podcasts like this to try to answer some of the questions that are, at least in my mind, and hopefully in your mind, about Ventura County agriculture. Join us again. Thanks.